Hi, my name is Bailey DeBarmore, and I'm one of the AHA Early Career Bloggers. I'm here at Scientific Sessions with Leilani Graham, and we're going to talk about a different take on the Scientific Sessions today.
Yeah, so I'm Leilani Graham. I'm a 4-time cardiac arrest survivor and recent heart transplant recipient about 2 years ago. And I'm here to give the patient voice to the AHA conference.
So what do you think so far?
It's a great question. It's definitely a lot more of a technical conference than I'm used to. Some of the presentations have been palatable for me as an engaged patient. Others have been a little bit over my head. But it's a nice mix of both. And it's huge. This is certainly the largest health conference I've ever been to.
So what has stood out to you, the takeaway at the end of each very long, very full day?
I would say advancement and collaboration.
Okay.
There have been presentations that have touched on research that I've heard on the periphery, but seeing the people who literally, got the data, interpreted the data, wrote up the data, presenting about it has been really, more of a one-to-one relationship than reading it in a journal, for example. And then collaboration. You go out into the halls and everyone's talking to each other and connecting and sharing their work. It doesn't feel like anyone's closed door about it.
No. I think the AHA does very well with kind of breaking down those barriers of the hyper-competitive industries for the betterment of research.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So what would you have to say to some of the basic scientists or the research presenters that you've met or that you've sat in on their talks with this week?
I would say that I don't often have a lot of interaction directly with scientists other than those I've met through my own condition or through friends. And I often feel like the inverse is true, that they don't necessarily get to see patients as much as a clinician or a surgeon even would. So I would say to them that your work has direct impact on my quality of life. So it's been really fascinating to me to go to certain presentations that are more data or research focused that have been then used in a clinical sense for either my treatment or others in my community. So I would say a big takeaway is, get that out into the patient world, have people understand the work you're working on.
I know there's been a precision medicine summit today, and I know that you've been tweeting about some of the AI, the artificial intelligence stuff coming out. Anything that's really kind of gotten you excited or something that you say, hey, I've heard about that through your own patient advocacy research?
Yeah, the precision medicine stuff is fascinating to me because I think a lot of the time when I've presented examples in my clinic appointments of here's something I would like to test for to see if this was some sort of phenotypic response to X and Y. Sometimes I get up against the barrier of, oh, that's precision medicine that doesn't necessarily exist yet or that we haven't delved into. So seeing examples of how that's being opened and whether or not it's a black hole or not, it's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about kind of spinning off the precision medicine and how it's not reaching all patients yet, but what it's like with the challenges of being treated as one of the averages that comes out of a lot of these studies? I know myself as an epidemiologist that we understand that there's a normal distribution, and a lot of times we're limited by application or just by what others are doing by only addressing the average. And you are definitely one of the outliers.
Yeah.
25 years old, heart transplant. And that makes a really big difference at the individual level and at patient care. And I think that's one of the reasons, I've enjoyed chatting with you this whole week because your perspective is really valuable here.
Thank you. I think that being that outlier all the time has definitely emboldened me to look beyond sort of the predictive modeling. But yet, I think it's been really valuable in conversations with my clinicians when they want to bring up, a new drug or a new therapy to have them understand the average risk factors and communicate that to me. Builds a sense of trust. It builds a sense of understanding of the risks that we're both embarking on together. But I think it's also twofold. I often recognize that I'm very fortunate to be treated at a center that is a center of excellence. And in fact, I think like some 10 different physicians, nurses, et cetera, that have treated me are at this conference. And so that's something.
Good sign.
Yeah, good sign that they're up on the latest stuff. But I often think about people in my support networks or social media and the community who have similar conditions who don't have access to that because they often are treated on the average and therefore might suffer because of the lack of precision in their care.
And so that kind of segues into my next question of, I asked you what you would have to say to the basic researchers. What do you have to say to the clinicians, from the ones writing the guidelines to the ones presenting on their trial results?
So I think something that's a trend in general that I've noticed with trials that call for patient participation is a greater level of transparency.
Okay.
And whether that's in giving the patient their own data back real time or a return of results, or involving them to let them know whether or not the clinical trial worked out in a way that was favorable to them, has been sort of getting the ball rolling. And to the clinicians that I've seen here who are presenting that, I hope that they will take away that you're bound to get better patient engagement if there's some sort of ROI for the patient.
So what do you have to say to the clinicians and the researchers that are involved in writing the guidelines and presenting them here?
So that's a part of, I guess, this conference that I was less familiar with. As a patient, you're treated based on the guidelines, but you don't necessarily know that that's what's happening behind the scenes. And I think it's important that these guidelines are evolving. Just seeing not only the excitement here about the new hypertension guidelines, but also going home in the evening and seeing it all over my social media as well. I really didn't understand the reach of that before coming to this conference. And I think there are people here who are active about trying to incorporate new technologies and new quality of care into the guidelines. So I think keeping an open mind is the biggest thing. I mean, the people who've presented that I'm most enthralled by are those who are perhaps even challenging what is currently set out, because
I felt the same way.
Yeah, technology has already moved us past that.
Yeah, I've been really enthralled with the researchers that are really challenging the research paradigm. There was one this morning at the Precision Medicine Summit that came out of the Duke Research Institute, looking at asking the question first and then finding the data.
Yes.
And so as an epidemiologist, a lot of times it's, this is the data we have, what question can we ask? And that's not always right. And so that concept kind of goes into this whole thing with my research legacy, with any of the precision medicine that requires genetic data means we need a lot more data, which means we need a lot more participant engagement.
Yeah.
And so it's this twofold of almost the community-based participatory research, as well as giving back to the participants and making them, feel engaged in it, as well as, having the clinicians involved. And so this kind of goes to a question I had for you, is that you mentioned that as a patient, you're not aware of the guidelines that, or not necessarily aware of the guidelines that the clinician has. What do you feel like it's part of the transparency of giving care that they express that something is based on, data, or, tying back into the whole average versus outlier of, are these guidelines very general, or are they meant for someone like me? When you're sitting there talking to the doctor, how do you feel about what their recommendations are?
That's an intense question.
Yeah, and seeing it from this side.
Yeah, I think back to your earlier point, you bring up something that helps me answer this question, which is we need more data.
Right.
And that's something that I have personally run into in my own care of, bringing together things that I've found, in not just WebMD, but actual research, case studies,
Still
articles,
a case study, yeah.
and bringing them forth and saying, hey, I think this could possibly be a treatment option, or if it's too late for me, this could be a treatment option for someone who had, my native condition, which was hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And sometimes the pushback I get is there's just not enough data yet to warrant us making that kind of a change, because it's too risky, too dangerous, or there's just, they say that they can't support it. But yet I find that transparency in saying that, or transparency in the guidelines of saying, well, this technically doesn't fall under what we would normally do for someone like you, but not only is your quality of life improved, but possibly your prognosis improved by sort of going outside of that.
So that sounds a lot like including the patient as part of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. Shared decision making.
Yeah, shared decision making.
Huge part of it.
Well, that's really great. So what do you think, your plane ride home, what do you think you're going to take away from this conference?
I I think it's twofold. I mean, on the personal side, I'm taking away a lot of information about, the prognosis of others in my family who have HCM, also in the treatment of transplant and how that's changing. And then on a broader side, on the patient advocacy side, it's been fascinating to meet people either from devices that are here exhibiting or people that are presenting, and no matter what field of medicine they're in. They're often surprised to meet a patient at one of these.
Yeah, they are. They are.
And so I think I'm taking away that, pushing the envelope a little bit in these kinds of what could be seen as overly technical to a patient conferences is important, because the conversations that I've had, the people that I've met, it's opened my eyes as someone treated by this community. And I think that could be incredibly beneficial for a lot of people in those groups.
Yeah. I think it's important to remember that the numbers up on the screen and that make up all of those measures of association that we present and we make decisions on are actually patients.
Yeah, totally agree.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. And it's been so great to meet you this year at the AHA Scientific Sessions.
You too. Thanks for your great questions.
Yeah.